So when Deborah Kahn and Ruth King visited our offices in Beijing last month, they brought with them Gulliver Turtle. And I think I saw some Gulliver Turtles hanging around in different people's bags. And Gulliver's slogan is bringing research out of its shell. And this is really appropriate for China because the earliest Chinese research and inquiries into the nature of the universe during the Shang Dynasty was actually written on turtle shells. So you can see that here. And when these were rediscovered about 2,000 years later, the farmers who were finding them in the field actually thought they were dragon bones. So they would sell them, and the doctors at the time would grind them up, and it was sold as a cure for malaria. And Chinese medical research has come a long way since then. But I know that for many of you, you'll sometimes find that a paper written by a Chinese author can be as difficult to read as a script on the shell here. So the goal for Edanz is to work with Chinese authors with a service in their own language and time zone to make sure that their research is communicated clearly. And Dr. Wang talked a lot about the challenges faced by Chinese authors, and I thought it was very interesting how he focused in a lot on the young age of the scientists and how there's been this really rapid development. And so what we found is, like we said, that it's not just about the language barrier, it's about the whole culture surrounding scientific communication and the peer review process. So what we try to do is provide something of an answer to this problem and to be a part of building this positive culture, especially with the younger scientists. And this is an author survey we conducted on ScienceNet. And Kerry mentioned China Science Press, which is the publishing arm partially for the Chinese Academy of Sciences. ScienceNet is an online portal that's also a part of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And we surveyed about a little over 600 authors. And what we found is most of them were young and relatively inexperienced. So some respondents hadn't even published any papers yet, so maybe some of these were Professor Wang's students before he gave them the ultimatum. But most of them had published 3 or less papers. And about a quarter said that revising their English is the most difficult thing they face. Then about 40% said that either understanding the journal's guide for authors or preparing their manuscript accordingly was a challenge. And something as seemingly simple as complying with word limits or changing your font type or size correctly can be barriers. So we've set up our service to make sure that language and formatting isn't a barrier and that the papers can be judged on the merits of their content. Not surprisingly, responding to peer review comments is a big challenge. And Professor Wang mentioned that sometimes there's maybe an emotional reaction to the negative feedback rather than seeing this as something that's positive. And really, I think if we did this survey in any country, people would say peer review is challenging, and that's how it should be. But once again, we seek to remove language as a barrier in this part of the process. So we've built our brand and our business in China by gaining the trust of the Chinese scientific community. And we've done this through the community outreach. So holding these training presentations is really probably the most important thing that we do, because it gives us a chance to actually learn from the authors and find out what are your challenges. And we can give them the skills they need in language and give them the message about how peer review is a positive part of the process. As Kerry mentioned, these are given by our own experts, and we'll customize the presentations to the audience. So at the neuroscience event, all of the examples, language examples, were to do with neuroscience. If we go in and speak to a biophysics research group, we'll do the same thing. we give the presentations in China and Japan, but also increasingly in other areas, in Korea and Saudi Arabia, even in the US. And to make sure the message is driven home, we try and highlight some of the key messages in the local languages, just to make sure that the authors really get the point. So in the 2 hours, we try and address all of the challenges faced by young scientists or inexperienced scientists. And there's a large interactive section on it as well. We, like Dr. Wong mentioned, we need to give the young scientists confidence and some excitement. So we'll begin. These are some slides actually from the recent series of workshops we held with Springer that our senior life sciences editor, Dr. Ray, gave. So we set out why publish. And we tell the authors that your research isn't complete until it has been published for the global research community to read. And I think that's a very important message to start off with. In another slide, we talk about choosing a journal, and we mentioned that choosing an open access journal can be one of the best ways to reach that global audience. Because the culture of science is so young, and maybe even the supervisors of some of these students are young and relatively inexperienced themselves, there's sometimes a lack of knowledge of publication ethics, so that's something we spend time on. And if the students aren't as interested in the niceties of ethics, we make the point to them that you will be caught, and put quite a fine point on that. We talk about how peer review is a positive part of the process, and it will improve the quality of your paper, and everyone goes through rejection. It's very rare to be accepted the first time you send. We give details about how to respond. So when they get this feedback and they're feeling quite emotional about it, then they actually know, how do I respond in a positive way and get the best out of this. As Kerry mentioned, we give everyone a handout, and it's important to have really kind of concrete examples that they can put into practice and not be too abstract. This is one of my favorite slides. And we found that at the base of a lot of the problems for the young scientists is they don't read enough. And we set out that reading is a critical part of being a scientist, and that when you become a good reader, that will make you a good writer as well. We go in depth into each of the sections about what each should contain, and there will be specific language points. For example, you use the past tense or the present tense. And this is part of teaching the authors, how do you tell a story about what you've done to make it clear and interesting for the reader. We also talk about using display items to effectively communicate the findings. So I briefly mentioned ScienceNet before. And though the in-person live presentations are very important, this online in-person, the online training is also really important because it reaches such a broad audience. And we're very active on several of the Chinese language social platforms. So ScienceNet, as I mentioned, you may not have heard of these portals before, ScienceNet or DXY, but they're actually some of the world's largest scientific and medical online platforms. So ScienceNet, over 1 million registered users, DXY, a little over 1 million. ScienceNet, I think, has 150,000 visitors per day. And this is where Chinese scientists are going to talk to each other, talking about problems in their research, talking about what journals they want to be published in. So here, a DXY user said, I've heard of this journal, BMC Gastroenterology. Is it a good journal? How long does it take? How much does it cost? What country is it in? And some of the answers were provided by another user here as well. I also see people talking about BMC oncology, and I'm sure if any of you would like to get in touch with me, I can help just do a quick search on DXY and see if anyone's talking about your journal. I think that would be an interesting project. So because this is where the Chinese scientists are, it's where Edanz is, and we have these interactive blogs on Science Night or DXY. And we actually give free advice to authors. So if an author contacts us and they're having a problem, for example, here an author asked, how can I make my title more concise? We'll actually give them free advice for the whole community to see, how can you make your title more concise? Sometimes people just send us their abstract and ask us to edit it. And we're happy to do that because this is something that everyone benefits from. It's very interesting to me. Chinese scientists and doctors are very open on these online platforms. Going back a little bit to the author survey, and this was a fairly informal survey, but we asked, what is the primary criteria influencing your choice of a journal? And of course, we see appeal, the target audience, and impact factor. These are just only the main criteria people use. But we also see that Chinese authors are very aware of open access, and a significant amount are considering it as a main factor in their decision making. So we really hope to work closely with BMC and its journals, and we want to help you reach out to these scientific communities in Japan, in China, in the Middle East. We already have a good working relationship with Diane Wang, BMC's publishing manager in China. She was recently touring in South China, in Guangzhou, to promote Biomed Central and I think to talk about some of your journals.